tell a different story. Some living in cars and struggling.
I've lost my job. It's everything. It's family, it's community, it's where I've worked for almost the last 30 years.
Stats show Hollywood is dead. California's COVID lockdowns, fires, high taxes, streamers and YouTube. TV shoots are down more than 50%.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of StarRow. I'm glad to be joining you guys again. So thank you guys for tuning in on my first interview, the last video. Today I have another guest, and this topic is going to be different. We're going to be talking about the industry, the movie industry in particular, and we just want to kind of pick what's going on. Why is entertainment seem to be changing? Is the glory of what was known as Hollywood going to be something of the past? And what can we expect out of entertainers in this generation and in the future to come? But obviously, most of us don't really have an inside scoop on the industry, so I decided to invite someone who does. Today's guest, his name is William Gilmore. He's a production assistant, and he is an assistant location manager. We're going to talk about everything from the business of film, all the way to what stories get selected, how do movies make money, and what are the new technologies that are impacting the shape of the industry. He's also worked on Bad Boys 4. He's also worked on Magic Mike: The Last Dance. And he's also worked on Bad Monkey, which is an Apple TV show. He's worked on many more. I'll leave the link to his IMDb below in the description. So how's it going, William? How you doing today?
Thank you for having me, StarRow.
Excellent. So how's everything been going, man? How's the day been going? How's the week?
The week's been good. We had one of our productions roll by for the summer, and now everybody's just relaxed. This time it's just going to be a bunch of commercials rolling in here and there. And then next year we'll just start it off fresh. Bigger productions to come.
Awesome. And I just wanted to know, you're a production assistant and an assistant location manager. I figured most people, when they watch movies, they don't really know. They know the actors and they know the director. But I don't think a lot of people understand the behind the scenes, the people who make the movie come alive, right? Because the actor and director kind of are there just to kind of take all the credit, but there's a huge team behind the scenes. So what do you do on these big motion pictures?
So when it comes to being a assistant location manager, our job is to make sure that everything runs smoothly on the day in terms of accessing the location and getting our vendors coordinated. As a assistant location manager in the locations department, we talk with every single department, whether it's the assistant director's department, electric, grip, it's everyone. Everyone has to go through locations. For the most part, we do our best to secure locations, whether they're private with businesses or residential areas. We do our prep, which is getting the permits in general, and then before the day, notifying the neighborhood to make sure they're aware that we are going to be filming. Then on the day, if there are any problems that arise, we're definitely there to help as the bridge between the film world and the outside world, which is the regular world. When it comes to all of your live action shows and your feature films, there is a location manager that's making sure that all the locations are acquired before the shooting day. And that's how you get all of your amazing sunset shots on the beach and then your snowy landscapes in those barren areas. There is someone behind the scenes making sure that it is taken care of, making sure it's getting done. That's
Awesome.
where we come in.
So then I can call you to book me a venue at any time, right? That's what you're trying to say, right?
Absolutely, man.
All right. So you heard it here, folks. You can call this guy, and he'll get you the perfect sunset drop scene for whatever you need. No, we're just kidding. Anyways, further ado, let's just talk about the industry, man. So let's just cut to the chase. Everybody knows entertainment's not the same. There's definitely been some changes in the industry, whether people are questioning the quality of the work that's being done nowadays. There's just a lot of challenges going on. I just curious, just to pick your brain. What do you think? I mean, there was a union strike the other day, if I'm not mistaken. Production was halted. What was that about? Just for those who are not aware.
So, in reference to union strikes, it's normally in terms of, or it has been
Wait,
for the
so what
last,
are the
with the
unions?
Writers Guild of America. Yeah,
So obviously we know what unions are in a general term, right? Like a group of workers, but like how does like I guess the movie industry or Hollywood, like what are those unions like? What are they there to do? Or just give an example.
yeah. So, a great example is the Writers Guild of America. They are responsible for fighting for the worker and his wages and making sure they are getting a fair turnaround time. They are also responsible for making sure that over the years to come that those payouts steadily increase with the demand of inflation. And for the most part, when it comes to the last one that we had, that was the the big catalyst for the union strike. It was a demand for a change in the agreement, and there was a standstill between the studios and the unions. So they had to take a lot more time in order to fill out that, you know, that conflict to get it resolved in an orderly manner. But it's always going to be as a result of, just, I mean, I'm not going to say generalize it in terms of money, but the workers that create your your television shows and your feature films are always going to be doing their best work with the skills they've acquired over time, and they just want to be paid a fair wage.
Fair enough. But I mean, obviously Hollywood productions, they usually bring in a ton of money. I mean, the lifestyle that's usually associated with the film industry is like very lucrative. So I mean, are they not making enough money or what was that all about? I mean, or is there just like, I don't know, you tell me. I don't know what to really say about that.
Well, if we're talking about whether the studios make money or not, they definitely do, just from different revenue streams. So you'll have your box office, and then you'll also have your video on demand, and then you'll have your free cable, which involves advertising, right? In reference to the payouts of each worker, it's all based off of, the prior budget. There's a distinct budget for each and every project that comes into play, and then they'll budget out each one in reference to that. There are going to be your bigger projects like your Avengers projects that are going to demand a lot more time and energy and are definitely going to have a lower risk of failure. So they would assume they'd be able to get a higher wage. But
Excellent.
yeah, yeah, but there are there's levels in reference to the projects that you work on.
Okay. Okay. Okay, understood. I don't really want to. I didn't want to cut you off, but I just also did want to venture into the topic of. Apparently, they were saying like these Hollywood studio lots are empty, and that's kind of crazy to think about it. That Hollywood would be empty. I mean, California's been through a lot. I mean, the pandemic obviously hurt everybody, but then you had that fire situation. Um, I want to actually just go to this video real quick and share what's going on out there in Hollywood, or what seems to be the case, and then you can kind of break it down for us.
Okay.
So I'm gonna go over here. All right, let's see here.
Big Hollywood lots of Los Angeles are now finding homes elsewhere, both domestically and abroad. So, what is driving the exodus out of California? News Nation's Brian Enton looks into that story.
And you'll see the glitz and glamour, but the streets of Hollywood and the unemployed.
I'm just gonna pause it also for fair use, but it's kind of funny when you think about the term Hollywood being dead, right? Because I feel like when most people get an image, right, of America, they're usually thinking of Hollywood, right? They don't really know about the Midwest too much. They may know about Florida because obviously the beach and all that other stuff, or New York and its, busy districts. But Hollywood has always kind of had the stigma of being like the epicenter of American culture. So it's kind of crazy to me to see that, Hollywood is like is going to be an old glory possibly. But anyways, let's just let the video continue here.
No
Now,
one on the
mind you,
outside.
is what you're seeing kind of accurate, just out of curiosity, right? Because again, this is a news network, obviously their job is to tell the news, and obviously nowadays people, they're skeptical about the news. Is this kind of what you've been hearing, or this echo anything that sounds familiar to you?
Yeah, it's definitely familiar. In reference to this, you'll hear a lot of talk in reference to production incentives, right? Just the same as how you've had your companies go overseas to create cheaper productions for themselves, whether it's the car manufacturing industry or in terms of agriculture. It's going to be the same thing with the work that you're going to be doing in the film production, specifically with the workers. So for Georgia and Los Angeles, they do have their incentives, of course. It's just not enough anymore for people to be enticed enough to stay even in the States. There are people in the talks of moving entire game shows, which are simple studio lot productions that you can do right there in far remote places, you know, Greenland or Ireland or wherever else that they can find more appealing in terms of the total price that they have to pay for the total shoot, the physical shoot.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, I actually did want to, let me just continue the video here. All right. We'll let, for those of you who are interested in what Mel Gibson has to say, I'll leave a link in the description. But anyways, that's kind of really what I wanted to, get to in the video. Just out of curiosity, I was just wondering, what does that look like to you? Seeing an empty studio lot like that in Hollywood, because I feel like when you get into this industry, the goal is Hollywood. It has always been set on Hollywood, right? When people want the dream to become an actor or an entertainer, it's usually LA is like the first place. So, what does that say? What does that symbolize to you?
It symbolizes a change in reference to the distribution. I mean, I understand it looks kind of strange to say, but when we're talking about distribution, we're talking about, the total pie of the marketplace in general. So you're still going to have your people creating on the studio sets, and then you're also going to have people creating nationwide in the smaller remote areas, right? And then you'll have your live streamers, like your influencers. The market for entertainment, the market cap is still growing, so the money is still there. It's just the eyes are going into different places, and with that, the money is also going into different places. With those studios that are not being used at the moment, it just illustrates, how those segments just aren't being distributed the same anymore. With film and TV, you used to have everything, not necessarily monopolized, but more along that one channel route of, hey, everyone's going to cable. And now it's, hey, some people are at cable, some people are going to Netflix, and then even the other bigger ones, and they're just satisfied with just getting their HBO Max, Hulu Plus, and every other streaming service that feels, better in terms of a particular price point that you can just find online.
Got you, got you. And so that's perfect because we're actually about to, kind of segue into that. But I did want to talk about that, right? So obviously new technology has like had an impact on society, right? I feel like a smartphone nowadays does a job of like what 18 devices used to do back then, like probably 40 years ago. So people now have access to different technology or different forms of entertainment now, thanks to many platforms like YouTube, for example, which is a platform that this video will be on. Um, with that being said, can you talk about just how these new technologies, are affecting the business? Like you just brought the streaming services, you were talking about price point. I mean, is there any, what's the big sell behind the streaming service compared to, other forms of entertainment?
So if we're talking about streaming in terms of, why it has a bigger impact, you have your movie libraries, right? So you have Disney that's created their library of musical works over time, and then they've streamed into the live action. You have a built-in library with Netflix that they can do at a good budget of just licensing from these studios or these independent producers so that they can constantly create. They have it constantly flowing in at a steady rate. and that's the appeal. The audience does not have to constantly wait for the next best feature film to hit the theaters when they can simply log on to Netflix and watch an entire completed series without any advertisements at all. The level of access that you have to said devices will determine, how frequently you're going to get to them. Like if you have a $50,000 vehicle, more people are going to be able to access that as opposed to like a $2 million sports car that is going up for auction.
All right. All right. So now with that being said, right? So like, we got the big streaming like giants, right? Disney Plus, Hulu, um, Netflix, HBO Max, which, they're all doing great. And especially since the pandemic, I think, they've had a chance to, really pick up a head of steam. But we also got to talk about the creators, because creators now, if I'm being honest, they're competing with the eyeballs, for the movie theaters. They're competing with streaming services too to some degree, because even though it still falls under streaming, it's still by and large, competition. And you've got people like I Show Speed, Kai Cenat, creating another, form of entertainment that is different now. It's live. Can you just speak to that a little bit more? Just to what what do you think about that and the movies?
Yeah, so when I was working on a short film with a great director named Gabrielle Boitier, we were working on her first short film, and I was discussing with the cinematographer how I was interested in trying to do my first feature, but I told him, the joke is you can make it when you have the money. But he went on to tell me about how, the gear that you have now is going to make everything more accessible over time. You don't have to wait in order to produce that web series if you have a means of gaining the small amount of capital that you need in order to make it. So the same thing is going to go with those influencers. They have access to phones that they can buy for cheap, even on eBay if they wanted to. But moreover, they have the capability of mass producing works because of their access to new technologies, as well as their sheer determination to create content in general.
Got you.
So uh, their access to those new technologies then allowed them to consistently build their audience, which then in turn allowed them to provide themselves a good enough income to not only raise how much they earn in terms of profit, but they can go in multiple network streams. They can go off and venture off into new areas, like how Kai Cenat and AMP have their own cologne now, right? The same thing can be said for a YouTube creator that wants to create, short films every once in a while to gain an audience, and then create their own TV show for Amazon Prime.
Ooh, no, that's really cool. And I mean, like people are using like iPhones nowadays as almost like film cameras now. And do you think people really care about that high production value like they once did? You know how like from the 50s in the movies, that big gigantic screen and all these microphones and special lights. Like I mean, I know people still use them in their content creating studios, but I mean, how does all that technology, does that even matter anymore? Do you really have to make like a high value production nowadays because everybody has a high definition TV now. I mean, it's almost like standard to see things in high definition. So is that good enough for the consumer to just like, take in content like that? Or because like I feel like movies used to sell this idea that you're not just getting a show, but you're getting this state of the art, sound quality, picture quality. Do you think that that has been diminished somewhat because of the just ease of access to high definition, technology? Go ahead.
The audience has always been attracted to good technique, film technique, and good characters. Quality techniques and quality characters. So no matter whether you're shooting in 1080 or 4K, there are still similar rules that will apply to cinematographers as well as the people that are recording your sound. And from there, they go on to utilize these techniques to convey the story in such a way that guides them through on a, I'm not trying to say a wiggly path or anything, but I'm trying to say guiding them along this roller coaster of emotions where they get to see this individual finally succeed despite all despite all of these obstacles that they have in their way. Whether you're shooting in 4K or 1080, if you don't take into account the idea of, creating a quality character and utilizing the same techniques of the past, then the quality of the film will drop.
Got you. Okay, I got you. And with that said, you said like people are always attracted to good characters, and what was the other thing you said? Good characters and what else?
Good characters and film technique. I know film technique can be, kind of subjective. In the case of most great films, they've used a lot of amazing techniques in order to guide that story exactly where they need to go. There was a J.J. Abrams TED Talk that, ironically, I just watched a couple of weeks ago, and it was in reference to him stating that when it comes to film, you should not be trying to replicate the elements in terms of the big explosions as much as trying to steal the characters from the past, the great characters of the past, like your Columbo, who was a great detective. If you started using that as your template for Sherlock Holmes, I'm not saying it would be downright awesome and completely I wouldn't say downright crazy to do, as long as you make a change. But what I'm trying to say is the character themselves really have a way of pushing the story along. And if you can't come up with those same characters, it doesn't matter if you're shooting in 1080 or 4K or trying to get it along a video game, you're not going to get the same audience reaction from said project.
Fair enough. Okay. And the reason why I'm bringing that up is because, obviously it seems like people usually tend to recreate elements. I feel like a lot of films do that. So you thinking that you think that so many good stories have been told over the past, 50 years or so, that nowadays, like the films are starting to probably recreate too many of those same elements now. This is probably why people feel like the storytelling is not that good. And, because like, right, like I feel like a lot of people will say, oh, the movies are generic now. The stories are not as vibrant as they once were. It seems like all the studios are, just not doing the right things. What can we talk about, like storytelling, like how, because like for example, right, we just talked about streamers, like Kai Cenat's stream, it's entertaining because I feel like it's unpredictable, and he's constantly bringing in high level celebrity guests, and it's like it's just a never ending cycle of just like cool stuff happening. Or iShowSpeed is always trying to do something exciting, once after the other. So is it just a matter that those guys, what they do, is it the fact that because they're just always changing things up, that's making them more exciting than going to go see a movie nowadays? Or is it that the film writers or whoever's telling the stories just doesn't seem to be able to grab attention because they're just replicating what's been done before? Like talk about, like I think a lot of people would want to know, like, how do they make these stories? Like, how does a story even get created for a film nowadays?
So you want to talk in reference to the process then, in reference to
Yeah,
writing
because I was saying
stories.
that you brought up J.J. Abrams said not recreating elements, and I feel like people feel like the stories are too generic, or there's so many sequels coming out. Like, where are those original productions that people can say, "Oh, this took a chance, it was risky," just from a consumer's level, because I don't really know that much about this business.
Okay, then let's just start with the story in general. A good number of the stories that you hear are, shopped from different areas. There are a bunch of scriptwriters that are pouring their hearts into creating these new stories that we have. And then there are a good number of scripts that are, being made or taken part of by these production executives that have been in the industry working their ways up in the ranks, but not necessarily in terms of life experience, in terms of career. So that perspective can change the type of stories that are being fully presented to the big screen. But in reference to what you were talking about with Kai Cenat and the other influencers, I believe that they still take on a good number of the the same entertainment elements. You have your highs and your lows. You're going throughout this journey with this individual throughout everything. You see Kai Cenat as he's a child, and now he's in his 20s, still living his best life. And when he's creating all of these new shows, they are replicating some of the old elements. Sometimes you'll see them working on Jeopardy or just playing basketball, just be via YouTube. But for the most part, they're still taking into account, what the audience wants to see. The audience wants to see something that they don't see every day. It's what Mr. Beast, one of the most famous YouTubers out there, established himself. You need something that grabs the audience in general, that they won't see every day. And that will also go the same for your movies that you see in theaters. You've seen a coffee waitress that's probably changed her life and gone throughout her hero's journey in reference to theater films. Right?
You what, 50 million breakups?
Right.
Coffee waitress got 50 million breakups and trying to find Mr. Right.
Well, I haven't seen it, but if that's one of them, then that's one of them.
Okay,
Right?
gotcha.
When you see the new stuff, the stuff that really excites people, like your Star Wars or your Lord of the Rings, they're mashing elements together to create new life. With Dragon Ball, it was a young kid who happened to have alien elements, right? Came from a distant planet that got destroyed. That sounds exactly like Superman.
Yeah.
They're taking those same elements from Superman. If not, they're completely. I mean, it's a huge coincidence. They're taking those elements and then they're adding their own culture, which is kung fu and new technology, and this whole idea of a mystical force that allows them to make any of their hopes and wishes come true. Those big franchises that you see that are extremely successful are mixing together elements of general life and adding a splash of extreme excitement, going right off the Richter scale, even with your Fast and the Furious and your Transformers, robots that are actually turn into cars.
Okay. So can you actually just so suppose somebody's watching this and they're like, hey, I just want to write a script and turn it into a movie. Like, how does that go? Or can somebody do that? Or is it more technical than that? Because I'm sure if people are probably questioning the quality of stories, I'm sure there's people out there who are probably saying, I got some stories that I could tell, or I think I could, contribute. What does that look like, that process?
So when it comes to trying to turn your story into reality, that's usually along the lines of film producer. That's the person that makes things happen. The director guides the vision, and then you have all of your other departments that help bring that story to life in reference to bringing in their skills and expertise in reference to the film techniques. Your grip, electric, your art department, and everyone else that's associated together. When it comes to being extremely realistic in terms of what you want to create, it's all in reference to, firstly, what you know in terms of the process of creating said project, whether it's a web series or, a full-on television series, and then moving on with the resources that you have available, which is why I say, capital is probably your first bet in reference to making sure that everything is set in motion, because you don't want to be a one-hit wonder. There are plenty of short filmmakers that create their works and continue to create their works out of college, but they only do it every so often because they don't batch or calculate the fact that they can only produce one film every once in a while, as opposed to trying to do multiple of something, which is a web series, or the bigger thing, which is the feature film that you can put in those big festivals. So yeah.
So with the business side of film, right? So obviously we live in a consumer-based society, right? The consumer is right?
Right.
Why is it that if people keep saying the movies are not that good, like why do the same kind of movies keep coming out? Like shouldn't they be like Hollywood it's been clear as day that Hollywood's losing money. So what do you think is causing, like on the business side, why do they keep making these films that are not doing good and they keep trying the same things and they're not working? Like, I think, the business side of it, I don't think a lot of people even understand, like, box office, like if a movie does good at the box office, just because it's slightly over the budget, does that mean the movie was successful? Talk about that.
Okay, so there are films like the Titanic that made 4x its budget,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then there are other ones that have gone 49 times their original budget. There are, basic examples, not for 49 times, of course, but your Friday the 13th is less than $1 million, made about $40 million in the box office. Where I'm trying to go with this specifically is in reference to making your story. Yeah, I mean, hold on, because when we think about it,
Well, like, first of all,
yeah,
how do we know if a movie's profitable or not, right? Because I've seen many movies where the budget was like 35 million and the box office was 47. Is that necessarily what they do to determine if the movie made money or not? Or because I've heard many people say like these movies are losing money. Like Mission Impossible the other day came out with Tom Cruise, and he really went in really hard on it, expecting to get a huge payout. And the budget for the movie, if I'm not mistaken, was around 150 to 200 million, and it got back I don't remember how much, almost 500 million. I don't remember what it was, but it was almost like they said the movie broke even. But the box office definitely showed there was a larger amount of money made in the budget. So how did the movie just break even if the box office is saying that the budget was like negative 3x the amount? Like that's what I'm saying. Like I guess for somebody to understand when you look at a box office and you look at the budget, how are we able to know if these movies are really making their money back or not?
okay. And in reference to truly seeing if a movie's made its money back or not, there are a plethora of resources that allow you to look into the scope of the budget. If you pull out your American Film Market's Producer's Handbook, there are a bunch of resources in there. Your Stage 32 is an example, not necessarily an example of looking at the box office, but there are multiple reports that are being made in reference to the budget, the box office, in terms of the domestic and international that you can find. It's just about finding the right set of books. But when it comes to looking in general at your films that come in, think of it like this. Think of it like, hey, if this movie makes this amount of money at the box office, let's say half of that, in theory, goes to the exhibitor, which is the theater, your AMC, your Regal Cinema. So if we look at a $50 million budget movie in terms of the physical production, right, plus the development, and then you have 100 million made in the box office, about half of that was profit. About half. So you're not really making a strong case for why you want to bring the movie back again. In reference to your Mission Impossible 5, you had a strong brand that had a lot of steam going for it. Not necessarily, a lot of, progression in terms of, the character build after a specific point, though. There was when it came to the main character, there were certain peaks in the franchise, but it died down and it gave way to just the love for the big explosions, the elements, not going into the philosophy. I'm not saying that that's the reason why it failed. I'm just saying the brand itself may have lost steam, and sometimes it's just about putting out the movie at the wrong time. That could be all of what it is. Maybe just a couple of years passed too soon, or it was just put out at the wrong time of the year. Sometimes it's just the small stuff. I say small stuff. It's pretty big because it costs you a lot. But
No, I get
it's
that.
important elements.
And then you were talking about producers, right? And you were saying that the producers, they put up the money for these films to be made. I think you should just give like a more detailed description on the producer, because I think everybody knows who the actors and directors are, because those are like the main players, right? We just talked about again. You look at a football team, a sports team, everybody knows who the point guard and the shooting guard is and the head coach is. But what people often forget is that there's a bunch of other coaches that make up that coaching staff. There's also a general manager that's behind the scenes, trying to recruit players. I feel like with the movie industry, producers are almost like those big names that kind of hide in the shadows of the talent, which is the director and the actors. What is the producer's role, and how would somebody go about being a producer if they wanted to? Just a detailed description.
So there are many different tiers of producer for your wide range of projects in terms of TV and film. The one that constantly stays constant is your executive producer, who is responsible for making sure that the development and set packaging of the project is carried, almost flawlessly. And that is getting your script, making sure that you go over it with your distributors that you're trying to get it out to begin with, because you're going to be reverse engineering. These are the people you're going to be shopping it to and getting it to at the completion of the film. So getting the scripts, packaging in reference to getting the actors, and then once those are underway, you make sure to get the financing for said project, which is, your banks, your private investors, your grants, your incentives, and then moving on to the physical production, and then carrying off with the marketing and distributing of said project. And then your marketing and distributing will be, planned out throughout all of the stages. So it's 6 stages: development, packaging, financing, production, marketing, distribution.
Got you. So the producer basically is just kind of like the boss that kind of just basically gets everything that's needed for the movie. And once they get everything that's needed for the movie, then everybody else just does their part. Okay. I mean, it makes sense, but sometimes you're trying to shift the blame. People are blaming a lot of these entertainers, but I'm not going to say I'm not going to say I'm blaming producers, but it's like, come on, producers, what are you guys doing?
Yeah.
You got to listen to the people, bro.
Yeah,
We want you guys to win. Obviously, when we watch a good movie, we watch a good show. I think we want to come back and we want to tell people about it, but you guys don't. I don't know. It doesn't seem like you guys are listening a lot.
I
What are
mean,
you gonna say?
yeah, in reference to the success of a TV show or a feature film, it does ultimately fall on the producers of the projects because they are responsible for making sure they do a thorough analysis and making sure that it's feasible to the market. If ultimately at the end of the day, it does, does fail, it's ultimately on them. But when they succeed in larger than life ways, like Law and Order. The executive producer of that show got all of the resources necessary to create an amazing piece of work with informed decisions and then carried it off and made sure that they had a close eye on the production as a whole. And now, 20, if not 30 years later, it is still pushing to this day. It's a piece of work that could go on endlessly if they wanted it to. But I mean, as much there's always going to be the not balancing forces, but different sides of the line. There are those extremely great projects that we talk about, and then there are, the terrible ones that we wish never existed. But if you don't try this range, or at least attempt over time, you're never going to get to having the good projects. So sometimes I'm not going to say like, you have to fail each and every time or something, but producers are doing their best to, provide you with, I would say, a story that is at the very least worth telling. If it does not work out, there are a sheer number of elements that are involved that, could obviously make that not the case, and they'd have to, suffer for it. But yeah, it all comes with the territory of creating these stories.
Okay, I got you. All right. Well, hopefully somebody, can tell some better stories, but
Yeah.
or two. But anyways, let's get to the fun part of the video, I would say, which is we're gonna analyze some films. Now, obviously, let's address the elephant in the room. What's your opinion on black cinema right now? What do you think about black cinema? Do you think it's made some improvements? Do you think, well, you know what? I'm gonna let you answer that because, you work in the industry, so, I don't know. You tell me.
Okay, so in reference to the studios that come to mind, you have Tyler Perry Studios, they have Will Packer, and then you have Spike Lee, as the champions. You know, I would say in reference to black cinema, it
What about Ryan? So
yeah,
what about Ryan Coogler and Jordan Peele? Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. You speak.
I would definitely say those two. Absolutely. For me, it's all in reference to, continuing on him too. Yeah. In reference to those six, they are strong brands. They are home names. I'm not gonna just chalk it up to, you know them. What am I trying to say? What am I trying to say? What I'm trying to say is, those are some of your bigger names that we can at least look at. Uh, there are your smaller productions that are still going on. I've seen some of them on Tubi, and then you also have Amazon Prime. Where you have your larger than life
Tubi's gonna
cast.
take over the world. You heard
Huh?
it here first, folks. Tubi's gonna take over the world.
Funny.
They started out, hey, they were free and people were laughing at them, but look at them, they're rising up. So get on the bandwagon, everybody. You heard it here first. Tubi's gonna be on the rise. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is, you have those central hubs, and then with black cinema in general, it's still progressing just like it always has. We may not see, our champions doing it like every single year, but they're still creating. It's just at a I guess at a smaller rate as opposed to all of these larger studios. These studios can put out 200, 300, if not more, like 500 movies a year if they wanted to. It's just quantity, sheer quantity, which is why it looks smaller in terms of the the total amount of cinematic movies that come out that are ours each year.
Okay, dope. So, all right, let's just analyze some films now, right? Because obviously, I've brought you on here. You've given us a great explanation of the business of film. So, for anybody who probably didn't understand what went into the business of how films get made, who calls the shots, how does the money get, split up, and how do you know if you make a profit or not? So, we've covered a lot of that. Let's actually talk about some films, and I want you to analyze them as like an actual film professional, because again, as a consumer, I can look at something and say, "Oh, I love that. Why am I not seeing that?" Or does this project work, and why doesn't this one work? But um, we're gonna go ahead and I know you said you were gonna talk about some film, so I'll allow you to go into your film or director's hat and talk about certain projects. Well, I guess we'll start with some black media first, and then we'll make our way into some mainstream projects. But yeah, man, go ahead. Tell us certain films and why you think they worked, and just yeah. I'd love to hear your opinion.
Okay, so every time that there is a successful film, it's based off of how the audience views the project in general, whether they like the story or they like the actors that are being played. If you had a movie like Friday, for example, you'd see that it ticks off a lot of regular elements. You have stories about people that you can relate to, and then you have a bigger than life personality in there to begin with.
Who
So,
though?
yeah,
Who is the personality? You gotta name drop.
Ice
Who was it?
Cube, Ice Cube.
Okay.
Yeah,
What
and
about
then
Smokey?
your Chris
Well,
Tucker, and then your Debo, and everybody else. John Witherspoon. A lot
yeah.
of big names. Neil Long, right? So these people started with smaller budgets because Friday was small, but it became a cult following in the future with good acting talent.
Got you.
So those helped build Friday into a trilogy of films. That one good base spawned off more. For a good number of movies that we see, as opposed to like Creed, which had a trilogy of films backing it. Some of these black cinema movies don't have a franchise that they're trying to build. It's the independent project itself that stands alone, which in some cases can lead it to fail, especially when it doesn't have a strong actor or a strong story behind it. Now, if
Okay.
you were, yeah, so it's just from what you can see, there, when you have your films like Get Out, right? You have it standalone by itself, a very strong story, right, with a thriller element that worked. And in reference to genres, it can be any genre as long as it's a good story and it can sell, as long as you have a good audience base.
I mean, Get
But
Out was
yeah,
huge. I mean, I think
yeah,
the budget was like 5 million, and it made like almost $300 million in the box office.
yeah, a great story at a great time. Yeah, with a great set of actors behind it. Yeah, so that worked with just a great story, great marketing, and great actors behind it. But when you go to your stories like Creed, which were similarly successful, you had your three stories, and you had a major actor, you had a great story, the same exact elements. Some of the other ones don't do the same. They just don't carry on with the why I say the franchise mentality. I mean making sure that you're setting up for multiple stories over time. When you had your Jurassic Park, they knew it was going to be a box office success after the first one, and then they planned for multiple to come. It's not the same with with all black cinema, that with all movies or stories that are being made.
For sure. I mean, that's true though, because I mean, well, Jordan Peele just had him, and that didn't work out too well. I mean, again, I'm not gonna lie. I I always like to, see what they're up to, but again, like they don't always hit home runs, just like any other projects. But Jordan Peele, he's put out a good track record, but that was I think his first, um, I guess, blow up or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, your
Uh,
highs and lows. You have your highs and lows.
and yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny because like sometimes I don't always agree with the stories that these black creators want to tell, but then again, it's kind of weird. Do you think that black cinematographers? I don't want to like. I'm not trying to throw any responsibility. I'm just curious. Do you think based on being somebody who's in the industry, works in it, and then being in the real world, blending in two of them, do you think that it's almost like black cinematographers bear a greater weight to, and when they make these films representing black people? I don't know, just out of curiosity.
In reference to the creators, I have to say that the only reason that it would seem as though, you know, their failures feel bigger is because they have less chances to fail in general. When
Okay.
you're trying to create your stories with your studios, right? You create the box office success, and then you have 5 to 6 other failures. When you have one black movie, I'm not saying it's do or die, but if it fails one time, there's less likely for it to bounce back because you don't have the same capital base in order to say, okay, that one failed, but let's keep continuing on with development company 2, 3, 4, and 5 for these stories here. You're taking one chance at a time whenever you get a certain amount of capital, just the same as when you're a short filmmaker. It's very, very discouraging, especially if that one project can determine, how big of a success you can be in the future. Literally paying back that loan or paying back your investors over time while trying to, succeed again. But the big difference between, the studios and the, black cinema makers is, it's just options, being able to attempt over and over and over again. There are going to be failures. It's not like there hasn't been a failure in the last like 2 or 3 years. There have been multiple failures, but the ability to try again and again and again separates, the studios from, black cinema. I'm not saying it's, entirely a, you know, a, what am I trying to say? For those black stories that you want to be successful, you have to involve more and more resources to see a better result. It's
Okay.
about the total sheer number of productions. So you can have a wide variety of stories that do and don't work.
For sure, for sure. No, I mean, hey, that's enlightening information for me. Yeah, it's kind of just funny, just to see the quality of the movies that have been told. And seeing the studios take chances. Like, I know this is kind of off topic a little bit, but it's like, you know, I know Harry Potter definitely had to have made a lot of money for was it Universal? Who was behind it? Whoever was behind it, because like you had 8 movies basically, or 7, I don't remember how many, and they all were commercially successful, all of them critically acclaimed. I mean, what are the chances of something like that happening? And obviously, J.K. Rowling wrote the stories or whatever, but I'm only using that as an example because, like, take Fast and Furious, for example. Fast and Furious has had so many, like, sequels and, additions. What, they're on Fast 10? What is it? Fast 10 Part 2 or whatever?
Right.
And I feel like they've achieved success, but, like, maybe not as much as that Harry Potter, but, you know, you think that the money, so, for example, like Fast X, I don't know critically, right? But the fact that fast cars driving, I guess, is just like bringing people in. Like, I don't know. You tell me, what do you think about those two franchises? And the pros and the cons of how both of them are successful or perceived.
Okay, so let's start off with Harry Potter and how that was, extremely successful. So we had a major book that was created by a phenomenal writer, and from there was that built-in audience. And then they were able to create that licensing deal to put it into a grand picture. Right when, they had the amazing visual effects and great cast members and everything else of that manner. So you had a built-in audience already for it. And then you translated the medium from books to TV. So those that weren't watching that weren't reading the books ended up watching the movie, and then your loyal fans end up going to that as well. So you expanded your audience from just the book readers to those that are actually,
So it's like the same. It's like the same kind of analogy with the comic book, basically, right? Those who read the comics
yeah.
versus who are going to the movies. Okay, yeah,
Yeah.
I can see that.
So
sure.
yeah, the built-in audience expansion. Then you move over to your films. You knock them back to back to back to back with more than just phenomenal stories.
So what about
Yeah.
Fast and Furious though? So Fast and
So
Furious,
Fast and Furious, you already have your NASCAR, which was been around
Talladega
for
Nights,
decades. Yeah, you have your
Ricky
NASCAR
Bobby,
drivers, and then you
wanna
have
go
your
fast?
street races on the streets, right? Your actual street racers on the streets,
True.
right? And people have many
McAvoy,
stories to tell. Yeah,
shout out to Lawrence Fishburne. Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. So you have your sports, right? For NASCAR, driving extremely fast, races. They have your actual subset of audience members that just literally do the thing, street racing. Then you have everyone else that just loves cars. Everyone, for a good general public of guys I talk to, the type of car that you drive in is like a lifelong dream. If you could drive a Rolls Royce for the rest of your life, you would. Or if you could drive a McLaren, it would be just the same. But is that love and interest in that specific, just genre that brought those people together? Since it's a larger pool of people, the larger the concept is, the more people you're generally going to bring in, whether it's young people or adults. As far as everyone else knows, cars have been here and are going to, be here to stay.
For sure.
Checking out.
No, no, so I appreciate that. No, I think it was some good analysis. But overall, what I guess what would be your call to action? Just to the people who like movies or feel like movies could be better. What should they do? How does this new yeah, just what's a call to action that you have? Because again, you know how the industry works better than most people.
Uh, my call to action for the people that you said, the people that want to get into the industry, you said, or to
Well, they want to get in, or maybe they just want the movies to be better. Like, what can people do to, I guess, help change the outcomes of these movies to make better entertainment these days? Or can they?
you when
This
it
other
comes
influence,
to yeah.
again, when the movies are being made, they're being made for a consumer, right? So I'm just saying, like, if you're talking to the consumer, you're like, hey, you don't like these movies? Well, this is how you'd go about it, kind of thing, whatever.
Whatever you don't like, you have to change yourself. You have to. When I say that, I really mean it, because you can't tell somebody how to spend their dollar. You can give a suggestion, but you can't command it out of them. These studios are still going to do exactly what they've been doing, what they find to be successful. If you like to see a true change in the industry, you'd have to take up arms and go out and create your own projects that others can see, or at the very least support the projects that are great stories. So if you're a a young filmmaker coming out of school, your best bet is to first and foremost find a community of storytellers that you actually want to support, and then building yourself up enough to be able to be the change that you want to see in the industry. It's just the same as every other industry in terms of the medical field or technology. You have a new path created for everyone. You're the spearhead of change.
Gotcha. No, that's cool, man. Awesome. So, without further ado, everybody, I'm just going to go ahead and thank you guys for listening to this episode. I want to thank William Gilmore for sharing his time with us and giving us some insight. I'm going to include a link to his IMDb so you can see all the projects he's worked on. Keep an update. Maybe if you want to work with him on a project or whatever it may be. I think you also work on short films as well.
Not as much as I used to, but I can definitely help in reference to making you guys set and ready when it comes to developing your scripts. At the very least, I can definitely help you guys with your scripts. And if you guys need any producing advice, I'm here for you. And I also have people by my side that are willing to do, more than that to make sure that a good story comes to fruition.
For sure. Anyways, folks, I would say the takeaway: keep your eyeballs glued to what you like, and definitely put your money behind your mouth.
Yeah.
Enjoy the rest of your day, and this is StarRow. Have a great rest of your day.